Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome to the Dice Tower Live Daily Chat. I am Bryan Drake, guest hosting tonight. We've got a fantastic guest tonight, somebody who I've been wanting to talk to and just chat about games for quite a while now. This is Glenn Drover, the legend. Glenn Drover right there, talking about the man, the myth, the legend, Glenn Drover for Forbidden Games. Say hi, Glenn.
Hey, how are you?
Doing great, doing great. Excited to be here. So basically, to give everybody kind of an idea of how this works, essentially, Glenn and I are going to chat, talk, just kick it back and forth about fun things, just all sorts of things, gaming and things like that. Usually, there's a food question that comes in invariably. And then we're going to also kick it to the chat and ask a couple people on chat to give you the questions that you've been wondering about. And we'll pull those up and we'll pick Glenn's brain for a little bit here, as well as just have a good time hanging out and having fun. So let me see if I can click this real quick. There we go. So we will start with this. Glenn, I have some questions just in general. I've noticed a bit of a trend in the last couple games, and it is the color red. Okay, I don't want to point this out, but you can't see it. I was going to say, I've got them right behind me, man.
Oh, there they are, yeah.
No, how are things going with you guys, man? Are you having fun? Are you in the creative mood right now, coming up with creative juices and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I came down with the virus actually coming out of Toy Fair. I almost brought it to Gamma with me, and
Right.
luckily canceled on Gamma at the last. Didn't show up.
Right.
But weirdly, after I recovered, we had some downtime, not shockingly,
Yeah.
and really have the last like month been going crazy with game design.
Yeah.
We're finishing up our expansions. I just factory samples for the Railroad Rivals and Raccoon Tycoon expansions from the factory this last week.
Fine.
And I was doing quality checks and noticed that one of the character cards that we added to Railroad Rivals is your wife.
It is, yes, that's right. We're big fans of all three of these games. I say all three, but you know what I mean. Of Railroad Rivals, Pirates, and Raccoon Tycoon. But especially Railroad Rivals, because it does feature our hometown, just happenstance Mobile, Alabama. So we were like, this is great. So Carla really enjoys playing that one too, knowing that that's coming, but also because it was already a fun pick for us. And when did that come out? End of 2018, going into 2019, the original ish.
Yeah, I think it launched in like October
Yeah.
of 18.
Yeah, and I'm gonna come back to that in a little bit, because I really want to. I really nail down a couple of things about your design style. Just a couple of questions that I have about that. As far as creative process goes,
Right.
So the reason I asked, so like when we come up, and you probably know this, you were on the cruise back in January, the Dice Tower cruise, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, yeah.
we did some illusions as far as that. So Carla and I, we're magicians, we're illusionists, you know. And when we come up with a new routine, there's two ways to do it really. And I've talked to I think Roy about this last time we were on. But there's the idea of when we come up with a trick, we either think of the end of it. Okay, I want a knife to be under a bag, and hopefully I don't hit my hand and stab my hand, right? And then we work backwards. Okay, how do we get to that point safely? Versus, ooh,
Right.
here's this neat little gimmick. What do we do to make that a real thing? You know what I'm saying? So I say all that, the huge preface, and it might be a quick answer. I don't know. When you're sitting down with a new game, because your library is pretty big, your gameology is pretty big. Do you start with the end result and work backwards, or do you start with kind of the nugget of an idea and work forward? If that makes any sense.
No, it does. I mean, it's funny because people have asked that question before, and it's funny because if you don't think about it, you don't really think about it, right? If the question's not been asked, you're like, you just do your thing, and it's interesting because at least for me, it's different every time.
Right.
So, like for example, back when I did Age of Empires 3, when I in between Eagle and Forbidden. My premise was, okay, I want to create a game about the age of discovery, the age of colonization. And I'm a history nerd. And so I was like, okay, I really dug into that period and read a lot of books. And so it was all theme. It was all, subject matter. And I've played some really good games kind of related to that through my, being a gamer my whole life.
Right.
And one of them was Sid Meier's Colonization. One of them was a game from SSG, if you remember who those guys were. They were an Australian strategy game company back in the 90s. And they did this brilliant game that was just, and again, they were working with probably like 64K of RAM for the whole game. And it was just this brilliant game, and they had a little mechanic in there where they loaded colonists onto a kind of a dock, and they would head off to the new world in a certain order. And that was the trigger for the mechanic that was kind of that track system. So it really just depends on the game. For that game, it was theme first, and then mechanics that were kind of inspired by other games. And then it just kind of, worker placement hadn't really been done. And I wasn't even thinking about it in terms of worker placement and things in their kind of, engine building. And so it was kind of all those things going around through my head at the same time. And it just so happened that I did an early worker placement game around the same time as what was the other one that was really first?
Not Agricola. There was the Uwe Rosenberg one, like the something West or something. Really
it was like a track that you followed along, and you put your guys, and you kind of all flowed through a track. And I can't remember the name of it, but it was before Agricola.
Right.
Anyway, like this was one of the early ones, but I wasn't thinking in terms of mechanic. So, and then if you turn to Railroad Rivals, that game was all, I guess not theme, but kind of the topic. Like I wanted to create a railroad game that was a dominoes kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so my kid had gotten dominoes for a grab bag Christmas gift at a Christmas party, to a family Christmas party.
Right.
And so I was kind of just looking at this going, dominoes is a stupid game.
Right.
But it's a classic, right? It's got that classic matching thing. And I was like, I wonder if I could do something that would be a little bit heavier version of dominoes with a railroad theme. Kind of layer, Railroad Tycoon onto dominoes. And then the ideas just started coming. So you start off with that kernel of an idea, and then just it builds. And I designed that.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
In like an hour.
That's what I was going to
ask you. It flowed together. The whole thing just came shooting out, and I just got my pad. I always use a legal pad, an orange legal pad or yellow legal pad. And I just got the pad, and I just started writing, and I made the prototype the next morning, and that was the game. The game was done.
That's awesome.
The only thing that changed was, in a very original prototype, you could deliver cubes like indefinitely down your connections.
Oh, instead of the one you just connected to, right? Yeah.
Right, and because that was very Railroad Tycoon. Right, that you'd be rewarded for creating these long connections. But what I realized pretty quickly was that just broke the game.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, maybe we just do it representationally, where if you deliver the cube into your network, that's it. And you wouldn't get extra points for having a longer connection, because that was just combining with the dominoes.
Especially with the dominoes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's
so.
funny.
Anyway, there's two examples of, I guess they were both themed, but, in a different way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because it's almost like you had the building blocks available to you, and you went shopping almost with Railroad Rivals, where it was just like, boom, here's this, and this, boom, there's that, and it works.
And it just crazy. Like I've never ever designed a game like that. I mean, usually it takes months of rework, and you test it stinks, and you fix it, and you change it, and like we're trying to do the follow-on to Raccoon Tycoon right now.
Right.
We've been working on that for most of a year, and we've gone through like 5 prototypes, and we finally got to one we really love. But the first 4 were terrible. Like we play them, and we're just like, oh, this game's work. It's not even fun.
Yeah.
And that's usually the way game design works: is you just beat your head against the wall and fix the things that are broken. And eventually, maybe you come up with something that's good.
Yeah, at that point, it seems like you lose the fun from it.
Well, sometimes game design is real work, right? It's not always good. It's not always a good time. It's sometimes really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just the marketing that's actually work. It's the design too.
It can be, especially when you're frustrated, especially when something's not coming together. At the end of my Eagle tenure, before I sold the company, we had the license to do Sid Meier's Pirates.
Oh, yeah.
And I did a bunch of designs, and they were all like subpar.
Right.
They weren't bad, but they just weren't great. And I just was like, I don't want to do that. I kind of messed up Sid Meier's Civilization it was too complicated. It wasn't really a great game. And I'm like, I don't want to do that to another Sid game. Railroad Tycoon was good, right? That one was a good
great.
one.
Mm-hmm.
And, Age of Empires 3 was a good PC license. But I was like, God, if I don't want to do a lackluster thing, just burn them, just to use the license.
Right. Just like, we want these rights, or we're going to use these rights. My gosh.
So anyway, sometimes you just beat your head against the wall. Yeah.
No.
So yeah, sometimes it's just a trash can.
No, that's good. Somebody asked in the chat, Glenn, as a history nerd, what are a few time frames you think are right for the board games that are set? I'm going to add to the broadcast. See if I do this right. I never know if I do anything right on this. Sorry. Yeah. What are some things you think would be a great historic time? And I'm going to add a tag to this question because I'm a huge history nerd as well. What's your go-to resource for that history field? Do you have are you a hardcore history fan or things like that where you just soak in?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been a history geek my whole life, right? So I majored in history in college. I read nothing but history. I had a time where I read sci-fi back in high school and college. No, I read literally all history all the time, and I'll kind of move through periods. Right. Or I'll be a World War II for a while. I'll do the Civil War for a while. I'll do Napoleonics. I'm really that's a real niche period,
it is.
And I'm into it. I'm way into it. So. Yeah, I mean, I just actually finished. We have a Napoleonic game called Victory and Glory Napoleon, and I just finished the Civil War version of that for the PC. So the next board game in that genre is probably going to be the Civil War. So for a board game version.
Yeah.
So I guess that's if the question is, was the question what period am I thinking about?
What's a period that you think needs to be served a little bit more for interest? Because I mean, there's a ton of Cold War games. There's ironic because there's not a lot of Cold War stuff, but you get Twilight Struggle and things like that. There's a ton of more war game style Civil War games, but there aren't really a lot of, as far as I'm thinking, a lot of Civil War games that aren't kind of in that real niche war game section. I mean, there's some, but.
Right, and kind of the Victory and Glory design is very similar to Twilight Struggle.
Yeah,
it's a card area control system with some stuff going on and some economics. So it's a little bit more, maybe a faster version, a more clean version of Twilight Struggle.
Right.
But that's such a classic game that I think it just has it's one of the best uses of card-driven historical gaming. Right, so. I don't mind, borrowing from their success and doing something similar. It's not really the system, but it's really similar.
Sure.
It kind of checks all the same boxes.
Well, and that's what's funny is we just played Twilight Struggle the other night, and I'm looking down at, I love it, but I'm looking down, I'm like, this looks so educational. It's like it's got kind of that feel to it. It's like, man, I really want to look like I'm playing a game, but this feels like I'm reading a pamphlet almost or something. But it's awesome. World War I. Somebody mentions World War I. Covered a ton. I guess it's because that's such a hard war. It's like how do you do? It's the fronts. Like it's push forward and push back. That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, you got the old classic diplomacy, right? Which is sort of starts in a World War I scenario.
The marriage killer, I hear.
Yeah. Oh, dude, don't play it with your wife ever. We used to play it back in high school and college, and we literally the only time in my life I had to flip the board.
Oh my gosh!
Right, like that literally happened. He was just somebody backstabbed him, and he flipped the board and walked out like in fury.
Okay.
We're like, I guess we're done.
Happened. Yeah. That's right. Oh my gosh, that's funny. Oh
yeah.
But that's funny that you say that about as far as I came up with a word. So I listen to a lot of bands do interviews and stuff. Well, not really that much anymore, but they always say the same thing. They always say that fans will come up to them after a show and they say, "Hey, this song, this means this to me," and they're like, "That's not what the song means, but whatever, that works for you." So I came up with this word, and I have no clue if this is going to come off as pejorative or not because it's not meant to. But I think Raccoon Tycoon and Railroad Rivals, there's two of my favorites. I love pirates, but it's a different feel, and I can't think of it. Doesn't fit my illustration. Basically, what I'm trying to say here, but distilled almost is the word I get. Like you lose some of the not necessary elements to get to that more core product. Not to say that you don't want to go back and play, Railways of the World or Age of Railroad Tycoon, but in those moments where you're like, man, I want that same feel of an economic game. What can I do to get that? I love how you've managed to distill those feelings and not really lose much of anything. And that's it. Talk about that process for a little bit of. You did it a little bit when it came to railroad rivals, but as far as the economic, almost kind of brassy simulator of manipulating a market.
Right.
How did that process come about when it came to Raccoon Tag? And we're talking recent games. We can go back in time too, but as far as these kind of more recent games that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, kind of I used to do pretty heavy games, right? That was in the early 2000s, and I love heavy games. Like we play at our club heavy games all the time, but it seemed like as I was starting Forbidden that that's been done to death now. Not in a bad way, but there's just hundreds of really good heavy games out there. And I was like, for the company, I was like, well, as a business model, I don't want to do what's already being done. Sure. I don't want to overserve the market that's already overserved. So what's maybe type of a product not being done much? And what struck me is that, you get games like Ticket to Ride or Catan or any of the classic games that are more elegant, that are a little simpler, but still have some great strategy and are really broad appeal. And I'm like, let's follow that model, right? Mm-hmm. So when I designed Raccoon, there was the first design was much more complex. We actually, for the marketplace, we were every turn drawing goods out of the bag to determine what prices were going to go up,
right,
and what was available to the player. And it was so tedious. Like, it was just too much work.
Right.
And so it was a really great supply and demand mechanic because it was perfect.
Right.
The goods that you took out of the bag to raise the price were goods that were not available for the players. Mm-hmm. It was a perfect mechanic for supply and demand, but it was terrible for gameplay. So it kind of forced
his work.
Right. I mean, it wasn't fun, and that's the other thing about this art form is it's entertainment, right? It's not just a simulator. It's not just a cool model of something. It's got to be fun.
It's slow motion.
And the players have to think that what. Right. Totally. And so, so we as the game was being developed, one of the things we intentionally did was streamline it so that things that were more complicated, like that marketplace or some other things that were in the game, eventually became more and more and more elegant and streamlined as we reached the end of the design process. So, and that was very intentional because of the audience that we were trying to go for that game. If we were doing a game like Terraforming Mars, where more complexity and more detail was cool because that audience wants that, we maybe wouldn't have done that. We would have just found a different way so it wasn't so tedious, but we would have left that in the game. No. So it was part of our kind of our mission objective to create something that is simpler to grasp and manage as you're playing, but still has some interesting choices. Right. And that was something that I learned from Sid Meier. I worked at Microprose back in the early 90s. And I would always go to his office when he was in and just kind of listen, right? I would ask him questions. He was designing the original Civilization at the time. And I was just like, oh my God,
this is amazing.
This guy's a genius. And, this game's going to be amazing. I just knew the topic that he was going to kill it. And I just sit in his office and ask him questions. I'm like, well, what drove you to do it this way, or why? And one thing he said that always stuck with me is that you want to let the players make the interesting decisions. You don't want the game to be doing all the fun stuff, right? And
that's a good point.
That's true in PC games and computer games, but also in board games and card games, that if a designer gets off into a tangent and he's creating this really cool system, well, the game's doing all the stuff, right? Or at least that's the risk. And the player's not really doing very much.
That's true.
And you want to give the player as much agency and as much effect on the outcome as possible, right? And not just roll a die and see if you can win, right?
No,
and so by doing that, you take some of that swing luck element out of it too, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's what's great about Euro games. This whole movement that happened after Catan and Puerto Rico, people were like, holy crap, less luck is actually a great thing, because I get to influence the outcome of the game because I made good decisions.
And those are those memorable moments. Like
So,
those are the moments that people walk away talking about.
sure.
It's like you remember when I did that, and not there are times like you're playing Manchester
Right,
Madness, one of my favorite games, where it's the game doing it, but like it's those moments of, do you remember when you invaded my territory, or we made that alliance for playing something like Twilight Imperium or something like that, where it's all you, it's your choices,
right?
Which is
That's
it's
a narrative, right? Mm-hmm. It's the storytelling of where you get to be the hero,
right? I mean, but it's true, because like there are so many game sessions that we talk about years later, just like that were fun, and it doesn't matter what game it is, because of the choices we were allowed to make in that little microcosm, whether it be a raccoon tycoon, or something like that, or where you're enjoying that, because it's so many. But you're right, though. You put the choices in the hands of the people, as opposed to, well, draw some cards, and here's what happens at the beginning of round 2 or round 3 or round 4. It's not. It's. I have this card. I really need to drive up the price, but I also need these goods. That moment of like is what makes it so much fun. So I love that about because the creative process to me is so interesting, regardless of whether it be a magic trick or a movie, or whether it be a book or something. That creative process is fascinating. You could spend years learning about that kind of idea. So.
Yeah, I got an interesting called Flow a couple of years ago when I was working on Raccoon and Railroad Rivals and Pirates, and it was just an interesting philosophical look at the creative process of how ideas lead to the next idea, and once you get into that like kind of sweet spot of creativity, that it just comes gushing out of you.
Sure.
And how do you start the process, and how do you keep it going, and all those things? This, like I said, just in a creative, and it's very frustrating. It can be hard to get that going again.
Yeah, it's like maintaining is a great example. It's like Super Mario Brothers on the Super Nintendo. When you fly with the cape, you have to really rhythmically maintain that balance of flight so that you stay in the air. It's kind of like that when it comes to creativity.
Totally.
You have to stay in it. So I saw a great question Kabuki Kid asked. So I'm going to throw up here on the chat. It's and we always, I know you probably get asked this every time you do any kind of interaction with non-other designers, but what's your favorite game that you had no involvement in at all? It's like just your favorite game, or you can give me a range, because I do that thing where I'm like, oh, this is my favorite game. Well, this is my favorite game today, but this is my favorite game. Give me a couple that you just love that you had no involvement in at all. That way we can also track your personal style.
Well, like I said, I like heavy games. I don't want to play a game that goes for 6 or 8 hours, but I don't at all mind playing a game for like 3 or 4. And that's kind of the new normal in this kind of, fast food gaming world we live in, where an hour seems to be the ideal. I'm cool doing 3 or 4. I don't want to do the whole day. It burns me out. I'm too old. But and just attention span anymore. But so anyway, I like games like Trajan. Like I said, Terraforming Mars. Loved what's it called? We just mentioned that's Cold War game.
Oh, Twilight Struggle.
Twilight Struggle, love that. I love a game. There's a game called it's an early automobiles in Germany, and
was it
Kraftwagen, right? Or Kraftwagen.
Yeah.
I love Kraftwagen. They did a great job of blending the theme and the mechanics. And it's got 5 sub games going on all at once.
And you're always having the building and everything.
Right.
It's really neat.
Right. Well done. And I think that's very clever, right? Where the players fronted with, well, I have to do all 5 things in some measure. And, then you got the little, what do you call it? The circle where you're going around on the what do you call it?
The rondelle.
And that's the action selection.
Yeah.
The rondelle, right. You got the action selection on the rondelle. So it was just a really clever mechanical game, but also just perfectly integrated a theme.
Yeah. And it's such a cool era. It's not just car making. It's like very early-ish car making sort of deal too, which is just neat. Those are good choices.
So those will be in my site. Also, I always mention Le Havre.
Yeah.
I think Le Havre actually has a really great, again, mechanics are really interesting. It's engine building, it's economics, and And then we've been playing Barrage a little bit lately,
Ooh,
and I think that's clever.
That's very clever.
Yeah.
It's like, yet again, you got to be careful who you're playing with. Or it's like you won't have friends after that. It's like, I'm just going to take this little bit of water from here. It's like, oh.
Right, totally. It's a little bit backstabby.
Who knew that water management could be that hardcore? You know what I'm saying? It's what I call the mundane theme games that I love the most, that are so like cutthroat. It's almost like the scene in There Will Be Blood at the end of it. It's like, oh wow, didn't realize that's what's happening.
oh, we're doing that.
Yeah, I guess that's what's happening now. So, but that's funny. I've got to answer 2 questions here. I just happened to see a little bit. Somebody asked if it was Bama or Auburn. Roll Tide all day. It's got to be Bama. Someone asked,
I agree. Roll Tide.
I'm a huge comic book nerd, so someone asked this. Let's see if I can throw it over there if it'll work. I don't. Hey Brian, I know you love Jeff Johns stuff for DC. What's your favorite from him? Favorite Lantern color, and what did you think of the Venditti? So I actually am wearing a Green Lantern ring, so it's like they read my mind already. I'm ready to go. It's actually my favorite Jeff Johns stuff is Blackest Night, and I'm a big Blue Lanterns fan. So I didn't read much of the Venditti stuff, but I did enjoy it. So had to throw. I saw that a lot earlier, and I was like, man, but we're on a roll, man. I'm not getting out here. Now I want to talk about another recent game, and then I want to dive way back for I say way back. I want to talk about some of the classic cube delivery railroad games too, man, because that's such a beautiful genre that it's its own thing. You know what I'm saying? And I know you're involved in that, and you took elements, and you've been involved in a lot of those kind of games. But man, just before we do that, I want to talk about Pirates for a minute. So Pirates, before we even talk about the game itself, it's one of those ones where I know that I'm trying to remember the biography of the guy who did the art for Pirates, but like Disney's involved somewhere, right? Like did art for Disney? Am I right about that?
Oh yeah,
man, that's a gorgeous looking.
Mark Page.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, and again, that was intentional for us from a marketing standpoint. Right. So sometimes these decisions are generated up front.
Sure.
We wanted to create games. So Raccoon Tycoon's very cuddly and has this cool art. Same thing with Pirates. It has this Disney-style art, so we actually actively went after a Disney artist and got one. So his name is Mark Page, and he is an Imagineer, and he works at Disney during the day. But he also has his own art thing going after work, and so we got him to do freelance for us, and he would do all of the art for Pirates, and it took him about a year because there's over 100 original cards on the way home. And so and on the map, actually, the map was done by Jared Blando, who's just a really talented fantasy map artist, and he's done a few things for us. But if you'll notice, all the little towns and ports and ships, those are all original drawings from Mark in the Disney style. So we kind of blended the art with the little friendly Disney towns and fortresses and that kind of thing to kind of give it a little extra dimension.
It looks just so good on the table too. I mean, it's got the 3D, the things like that, but the mechanics are so much fun because it's I've been calling it this. I'm notorious for calling things the wrong types of games all the time. People are like, it's not actually that. I'm like, but I call it kind of a race game, but there's a little bit more to it than racing. Because like when we played it and reviewed it and stuff, and played it again on the cruise and everything, it's such a fun. Again, it's lighter, but a lot of choices involved when it comes to, do I really want to just let that track go, or should I, or should I get it? Like, it's just such a cool idea. So. Pirates, is that kind of an homage to you saying, okay, I'm going to get back to Sid Meier's Pirates eventually a little bit?
Well, yeah, well, it's got an interesting backstory in the sense that after I sold Eagle, I went back into the video game industry and worked for a company called PopCap. Yeah. They did Bejeweled and Plants vs. Zombies and all those games. And again, I didn't do any game design. I was on the business side. I was in charge of their North American sales to retail. So I kind of go back and forth between being a suit and being a creative. And the creative stuff doesn't pay, so I have to go back to work after I'm done doing that for a while. So this is one of those moments where I stopped designing games and went back and sold them for a while. And then luckily EA came in and bought that company, and I was out of a job, but it was okay. They gave me a little bit of a buyout. And I took a year off to spend with my family. Right. And I was just kicking around doing it. And a buddy of mine, I don't know if you remember if you ever even saw a game called Bootleggers. It was a game that Eagle published back in probably 2004, 3 or 4, and it's a really clever game. If you talk about theme and mechanics, it's awesome. You should look for it and try it. Anyway, one of the 3 designers of that game approached me and he said, "Hey, you're not doing anything. How'd you like to design a game with me?" And so I'm like, "Yeah, all right. I'm not doing anything." And so I drove. He lives near Detroit, and I drove out there, and we spent a couple days. And all we did was talk about mechanics and games, and kind of, it was almost like I don't know what you call that when a bunch of farmers get in and they just do a design rush, right? And it was like one of those kind of events. There's got to be a real name for that. There's a name for it, right? So we did that. We just basically crunched game design for 2 days, and we came up with this game. It was Pirates, but at that time it had what was it? The theme was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and Around the World in 80 Days. It had 3 board novels, segments. Yeah. Right. That's awesome. And so basically, it didn't have 3 tracks. It had literally 3 boards. And our concept was that the main board was Around the World in 80 Days, but you could flip off and take out one of the other boards and bring in do like classic monster or Mars, kind of like classic Mars, Jules Verne. They were all Jules Verne novels. Yeah. So you could kind of take any of those kind of turn of the century themes and plug it in, and you'd have a system. And that was our original idea. And we worked in that game for like 2 years, and we were going to have Mr. B publish it, Sean Brown. Because I wasn't going to ever do game publishing. That was never going to happen. Nope. And we worked on it and got it down pretty good. And then when I decided to actually start publishing again, because of the concept for the new company, I was like, well, we can't do Jules. It's a little too, literary. It's a little too niche and gamey, and we want something that's broad appeal. So I was driving home from Gen Con 3 years ago, and I'm just thinking about, okay, what themes might work with game? And Pirates came into my head, and I'm like, yeah, I need to do this Pirates thing. And oh yeah, you could have, sailing through the Caribbean instead of, going around the world. You could have, plundering instead of this other thing. And it just really fit. And so the game was not designed as, but it just works really, really well.
That's funny. Yeah.
As a pirate game.
It does. I mean, it makes sense because there's so many even if you were to book a cruise today in the modern world, there's Southern Caribbean, Eastern Caribbean, Western Caribbean. There's all those kind of ideas. So that's funny. But now that you say that, I feel like someone's going to watch this and totally go rip off the Jules Verne theme too. Now they're going to be like, hey, this is...
They should. it's a really fun,
as
you
were saying that, I was like, that's exciting.
But there is one, right? Yeah, it was, and maybe, who knows? Maybe we'll do it as a sequel.
Yeah, the Crystal Golem version of it, like what's Century or whatever. No, that's cool. Yeah, but Pirates just works though, man. It's more light, but it works as a Pirates game. If you'd have never said that, I never would have thought. I would have thought ahead of that's clearly what it was meant to be. It was a Pirates game. So, how often does that happen? That something that's not the original idea gets disguised so well by a new idea. Like, is that pretty often? Or because I feel like sometimes you can spot the seams, But...
Yeah. No, it was funny because it really did. It was almost a better theme, right? It fit the game so much better than the original theme. Mm-hmm. Not usually. I would say that almost never happens. Like I said, usually for me at least, the trigger is theme right away, and mechanic comes second. So I'm going to retheme it because the whole design was based on the theme.
Sure.
So this was just an accident that this happened this way.
That's funny. That's always interesting when that happens. So I gotta let's see. Somebody, this Kabuki Kid again actually has a great question here. How was your experience in tweaking an existing game, something like Conquest of the Empire, versus I guess completely from the ground up sort of deal? And maybe you can kind of speak to that again. Fascinating. I think the game design process is a lot trickier than we even imagine sometimes for us lay people.
Yeah, like I said, sometimes it's the easiest thing you've ever done in your life.
Right.
Railroad Rivals, right? It just comes pouring out in one day. And sometimes you work on it for years. Mm-hmm. It's so crazy. You never know what you're going to get. So yeah, it's, I'll use an example, Lizard Wizard. is our new game that's supposed to be the sequel to, or at least the spiritual successor to Raccoon
Yeah,
King.
gotta be. It rhymes.
And,
That's awesome.
right? So it's Lizard Wizard, and it's instead of cute furry animals, it's human-sized dragons that are also wizards. And instead of a marketplace for money, it's a marketplace for mana.
Right.
And so you've got these magical reagents that you're converting into mana, and you're building wizards towers and recruiting these different 7 schools of magic dragons into your kind of, your alliance to gain power in this land. And so it's got a lot of the same feel as Raccoon, where it's elegant. You can do one of 7 things instead of one of 5 things, so it's a little bit more gamer directed,
right,
than Raccoon was. But so, for example, like I said, I've been working on it for about a year, and I've created 4 or 5 different prototypes, which every time I'm designing them, I'm thinking, this is amazing. This is going to be an incredible game.
This is the one.
And we get it to the table, and it's just a giant turd. You're just like, oh, this thing stinks. And, maybe there's one little good thing in there, a little to bring forward, but you just don't know. And I've been designing board games, at least professionally, for 20 years. And you'd think I would know, right? You'd think I designed a concept and create a whole prototype, which takes a lot of time to create all the little pieces and cards and everything working together. And you put it on the table, and I'm thinking this is a home run, and it just tanked. So you just don't know.
Well,
you never know.
It's funny. Like Carl and I are working on a game just out of a labor of love. If one day, 5 years from now, it's like on a shelf somewhere, amazing. But if not, who cares? It's just fun, right? So it's one of those things, though, where because we've never done it, we have the prototype, we sit down, and the friends we started playing with it, they start asking questions that never even entered our mind. They're like, well, what about this? It's like, that's a great question. It's almost like, I imagine that's not quite the same thing, being pretty seasoned as you are, but it was just like the question they asked was so obvious. It's like, how did we never think of that? Like when we were coming up and cutting out these pieces and all that. So I'm telling you, it's just such a fascinating thing. I know there are books on it, but man, it would be great to see some sort of like almost a documentary of the process, because I know we live in a microcosm hobby. I mean, there are people, believe it or not, folks out there in the Dice Tower, believe it or not, that have no clue that these games exist, right? But it's such a fascinating niche hobby, just because when people walk in and see the shelf, they go, what in the world are those? I'm like, those are board games. They're like, no, they're not. Those are not board games. Like, oh, but they are. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's crazy. So
games are Monopoly. They're flat. Yeah.
Flat.
It's crazy. Yeah, because my first non-Monopoly games when I was a kid were Avalon Hill games, which were in that bookcase style, and that was totally different. So they would look like the games they are on your shelf in the sense they look like books.
Right. And
Avalon Hill, I think they pioneered that back in the 60s, and they had a whole series of these really beautiful games, classics, and then they went into wargaming, right? So then they had all the, the squad leaders and the Third Reich, that stuff. But it was really interesting because even in the 70s, nobody knew. They'd walk in and see your bookshelf, and they'd be like, why, what's wrong with those books? They don't look right.
Yeah, that's like those are awfully thick books. Are they mystical tomes or something? So, what was the flash of genius moment that you can kind of draw back to from where? I should ask first. Did you play games a lot before? You kind of just answered it, but did you play a lot before you designed, or was it more like kind of concurrent?
No. I was a giant gamer nerd when I was a kid.
Right.
Played every kind of game. Loved toy soldiers. Loved strategy games. Anything that Milton Bradley put out.
Right.
That they had those series of historical games from the 70s, and then you had Axis and Allies came out in the 80s, and all those games in that series. And like I said, I played war games. I played all the hardcore hex-based war games as a kid, and I think I got Third Reich for my 8th birthday or something, which is super complex. I had no idea how to play this thing.
Also, when people walk in and see that on the table, they're like, what kind of a birthday present is the Third Reich? I don't understand. That's interesting.
Right. So, yeah, it was really strange. And then I picked up D&D in like 77 or 78 when it was brand new. It was in that little white box thing at the time before the Monster Manual. And some kid in my grade school was like, hey, we have this little group that gets together after school and we play this game where you go into dungeons. And I was like, what are you talking about, going into dungeons? And I just went to check it out, and I was like, yeah, all right, this is cool, this is fun.
That's fun.
And weirdly, we live right near where it was designed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we live in the Chicago suburbs, and D&D was designed in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin,
right, which
is in the furthest edge south of Wisconsin. And we used to spend summers up there. And so there was this little hobby shop called the Dungeon Hobby Shop in Lake Geneva. And that's where all the guys who designed D&D just hung out. That was their shop. Right. And I'd walk in there as like a 12-year-old kid, and I'd be standing there and kind of checking out the games, and they'd be over there talking about like their D&D campaign that they were running. And I'm just like, that's Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. I was like, whoa. But so it was just always part of my childhood to do all kinds of different gaming. And then I got into PC games. I was like early adopter on PC games. And that's why I joined the industry, because I was just such an avid strategy gamer. And I'm like, oh man, I got to work for either EA or Microprose. Right. And that was like 1989. I was out of college and selling steel, and that sucks, by the way. It's not a great career. But it was my first job. I was like, it was like one of those jobs where you get it, you go and you put your Times coat on, you go to a job fair and you talk to all these people and tell them, yes, I'd like to work in a corporate environment, and I'd like to push papers and sit at a desk my whole life.
Now that sounds amazing. About selling steel, which is interesting to me. It's like there's some Freudian stuff coming up. It's like, wait a minute, I'm making games about selling steel to people as a raccoon. Yeah,
I never thought of it, actually.
I think we're diving deep into the psyche of Glenn Drover tonight. That's what's happening right now.
Yeah, you really don't want that. That's not going to be good for anybody.
No. Oh man, that's funny. Oh, man. Eddie, it's funny.
So anyway, I went into the video game industry because that was my passion, right? That just to be any part of it, even on the business side, was just my dream, because I was so into gaming.
Well, I'm catching the dates you're laying down, so I'm not asking for your age, but I'm pinpointing an era. Were you like in that homebrew era, or I guess you're about 10 years past that when you wanted to join the industry, right? For the homebrew kind of computer club era and all that sort of stuff.
I was a consumer of those things, of course. Like I had all those systems.
Exciting.
Like I had, my first computer had a mesh keyboard and a tape drive, right? Literally, couldn't even afford. There was a cassette tape that attached to my Atari 400.
That's amazing.
And that would load a game into my, I think it was a 48K machine, and it would take like 10 minutes, 15 minutes to load up a program.
That's amazing.
So,
and the patience.
I was super into it. Yeah, it was like, hey, you want to play a game? Cool. Come back in 15 minutes.
I'm going to go make some popcorn.
Right. Right. And it would make this sound while it was loading. It was great. Those were the crazy early days. Yeah.
No, that's fascinating though. Like it does still boggles my mind that you're talking about like hidden figures and stuff, that this phone has more than what we use to send people to space, but still, it's still amazing to hear about the history of it, the history of computers and how it's where we are now. We're talking across the world from each other, or across the country from each other right now. Blows my mind.
Yeah.
So, but
it was pretty nuts. There was there was no memory. There was no storage capacity from a consumer's perspective, right? NASA, like you said, there was it didn't exist. And then every 2 or 3 years, like something new would break through, and you're just like, holy crap. Like the stuff I had 2-3 years ago is garbage. Yeah. So the change is just shocking. Like today I bought a new monitor.
Right.
You can maybe see it behind me. And this replaced a monitor that I had spent like $3,000 on because I really wanted a high-end monitor. This thing was $200.
It's amazing how
price dropped. It's a 60-inch TV for like, 200, maybe 240 at Best Buy.
That's it. It's crazy.
Yeah. So same thing's still going on. It's just technology keeps getting faster and smaller and less expensive. It's kind of amazing, all in our lifetime.
It is, and that's what. So you went from being in that technology industry. How did you go? Okay, you know what? I'm done with all this electronic stuff. I want to build something that is out of paper and cardboard and chips and tokens. Like what was that flash of genius moment where you're like, I'm jumping into this hobby that I've loved as a kid. Now I'm going to start making it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about genius. It was probably more like crazy stupidity.
Right.
I still remember the day. There was one moment of time. I had been working on some game designs that became Age of Imperialism, and I think Napoleon in Europe, and
Right.
there for a while there in the 90s and late 90s, early 2000s, there weren't a lot of miniatures games out there. And Fantasy Flight had done the big space opera game, Twilight Imperium, and there were a couple, but it had kind of died off as a genre. And I was like, well, I'm going to bring those back. And I was in the shower. I was working for Activision at the time. And I was in the shower, and I was about to get on an airplane and go take a trip to Minneapolis to call on Target or something. And I went in, my wife was still asleep. It was like 5:30 in the morning, and I came in and I kissed her goodbye, and I go, hey, I've been thinking, and I think I'm going to quit my job and start a board game publishing company.
She checks her calendar. Is it April 1st? What's the deal here? Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, I'm ready. I'm leaving. And she just woke up, and she's like, what? Because I had a pretty good job. Right. The money was good, and I was going to give that up and gamble our whole savings on publishing games. She thought I was insane, but she knew what she was getting into, because she knew I was already in the gaming industry and always wanted to design. So anyway, that was the moment where I just decided I was going to do it. And thought, I'd never run a company before, but I've done sales and marketing. I could probably do it.
Yeah.
That was just ridiculously dumb. It was such a steep learning curve, because this was all before Kickstarter, before, any of this stuff, before China was doing all the hard work of plastics, and I had to go and find sculptors and plastics manufacturers in the US, and it was crazy expensive and so much money at risk, and you had to just basically create all your product and hope that it would sell.
Yeah.
Right. There was none of this pre-sell demand generation, all that stuff.
You had to sell it.
There was no social media. Yeah, you got to make the goods and then see if you can go sell it. It was a nutty world. So I don't a smart decision or a stroke of genius at all. It was crazy, irresponsible, dumb, just the worst idea.
It was a gamble, but it worked out strangely. Right? That's funny. Oh man, that is fascinating to me, just to hear that moment of, hey, by the way, I put the paper on the table, and also I'm quitting my job. So just oh wow, things have really started off good for today. That's funny. So are you still a video gamer? Do you still enjoy video games and all that sort of stuff, or is it more?
Yeah, I mean, mostly war games, strategy games, games like Sid Meier's Civ. I still play a lot of Civ 6. It's still something that's, part of my gaming, fix every day. I need to have some every day, or I'm going to kind of go crazy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes sense. There's and what a glut of time we live in, where there are that many video games available at your fingertips, whether it be iOS or the Switch or PlayStation or whatever. But it is amazing to see how RPGs have evolved too, in that you hide something that was an old school pencil and paper RPG, and now it looks like the Outer Worlds or whatever, Fallout or things like that. So it's pretty wild. So now we've got to get to some obligatory food questions. We would not be a Ice Tower live Q&A with some obligatory food questions. Kabuki Kid, she asked earlier what was your favorite dessert, but I want to know some more than that. So I'm gonna give you some things to think on here in a second. Number one, what's your favorite meal to have at home? I don't know if you guys do a lot of cooking or not at home. Some people, I love cooking at home. What's your favorite at home meal? What's your favorite restaurant meal? And what's your favorite dessert? So you be thinking about these for a minute while I prattle on about board games and stuff like that. I'm gonna you keep that in the back of your mind. Somebody was asking earlier, and I may have lost the actual comment. As far as what's the oldest game in your collection? So I know I'm asking you to think about 16 different things at this time, but
that one's easier. Yeah. I actually just sold a couple that were in my collection, so I still have all my old Avalon Hill games, 70. But I had an old copy of Titan, one of the original printings of Titan, which is considered pretty valuable. I had a Hero Quest, and I sold that last summer. I still have Divine Right. Most of the games that I've got that I consider older are games from probably the late 70s, early 80s that I owned back then. So I've still got them stuck. No. They're terrible. They're terrible games. I mean, by today's standards.
Just nostalgia.
Right? No, back then, yeah. I mean, back then, I'd lay the board out on the floor of my room and move counters or pieces around for days and days and days. And I didn't care that, I usually played solo, but every once in a while, a buddy would come over and play. But the games were terrible games. They're, for the most part. There's still some classic. There's a game, one of the early block games. I don't know if you know Columbia Games. They are a company. I think they're in Vancouver.
Okay.
And they create these games on wooden blocks. The pieces are on wooden blocks, and they tend to be military history themed games. But they had an old classic that I think they got from Avalon Hill called Napoleon. But maybe the owner of that company designed that game. I can't remember. Tom Dalglish. I'm probably killing his name, but I think he designed that game, and it's a classic. It still holds up today. It's a brilliant, simple strategy, elegant game. Anyway, so those are kind of my classic old collectible games that I've still got or have recently sold.
Those are good. Those are good options. It's so funny to me when you say that. Though, people are talking about. I had Hammer of the Scots and things like that. I'm trying to think of like games that are 50 plus years, which I guess 77 will be 43 years right now. Cosmic Encounter is one of the few that just really stands out. People still play a version of today, but totally. It's funny you say that.
Ogre was from back then.
That's what I was gonna say. When you said Titan a minute ago, I thought, is that Ogre? No, it's a different game.
I owned all those little micro games. Ogre was one of them, and Melee and Wizard and all those little back then.
That's funny. It's weird because we are in such a cult of the new where it's like, man, you got to play this new Kickstarter game with all these miniatures, etc. And then you go, but there's some really great games that have come out over the last, I mean, you could say 40 years, but mostly, you're going to get those huge standouts. But some of them just stand the test of time, and it is funny to go back and play games that hold up so well and see why they hold up and how that can help people in designing games in the future to where it's like, why did these games hold up? Not nostalgia.
Sure.
Right.
Look at Acquire.
That's exactly the one I was thinking was Acquire. So.
It's a classic example, right? Sid Saxon was a great designer, and he has a pretty deep catalog, but that's the one everyone knows. And that was one of those bookcase games I was talking about. That was one of those classic Avalon Hill bookcase games.
And they just had I think a version of it probably the last 2 years, mass market version of Acquire, which I don't even know if the rules were exactly the same or not, but I was like, it's funny how long that stood the test of time with things like that. So, let me see. Sorry. Somebody's asking, Panzer Blitz, a bunch of these classic.
Played all those.
All right. So did you have a chance? I know I was talking the whole time. I asked you to think, but did you have a chance to think of your favorite meal at home? We'll start there.
Yeah, I guess it would be one of two things. I cook very seldom. My wife is a brilliant cook. She's got award-winning chili that is it's the best chili you'll ever have, and we have it every couple of weeks because it's just such a staple.
Well, hold on now. You're Midwest though, right? You just said you're in Chicago. So are we talking like that kind of like chili that's more like Skyline type chili, like Cincinnati, or is that a different style of chili?
No.
Okay, all right.
That's kind of sweet, right? Like that's kind of sweet, classic, beans and meat and a hot spice, and it's kind of Texasy, right? It's kind of that. Texas spice, classic chili, right?
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. It's not this weird stuff where you put brown sugar in
and
it.
Cinnamon, yeah.
Right.
Don't do that.
Stuff. No, it's
sorry, fans from Cincinnati. I just lost all of you.
Straight up chili. And it's just... and there's nothing wrong with Cincinnati chili. Skyline's great stuff.
Sure.
But it's a version
not what
of chili.
I think of when I think of chili.
Right. But I make a dish. I cook every once in a while.
Uh-huh.
Cook up, some huevos rancheros, or I'll do, corned beef hash or anything like that. And I do breakfast, but we've got these great cast iron pans, and I just love cooking in them. But for me, the one dish that I make that my kids love and I love making it's It's like a kind of shrimp, almost like a jambalaya, right? So it's very simple. You just cook the shrimp in a wok. You kind of melt a stick or two of butter, and you literally almost boil the shrimp in the butter.
That sounds amazing.
And then you have some wild. Oh, well, you can't go wrong with butter,
yeah.
right? Or bacon.
When you say a stick or two of butter, my heart just leaps. I was like, that's Alabama, man. That's how we do it.
It's comfort food, brother.
That's it.
So, and so you boil the shrimp, and then you just got some wild rice going on the side there, and you flop all the wild rice in with the butter, and the shrimps are nice and pink. And then you just spice the crap out of it. I mean, I hit it with really hard Cajun spices and everything, red pepper and hot Louisiana hot sauce, and it turns out burning your mouth. But it's what I like, so good and so simple.
I don't know if it's because I'm getting older or what, but I like hotter foods now because maybe my kids are killing my taste buds just from being older and like pulling my hair out from that. So it's like I need something spicy. But yeah, that sounds fantastic. Like I want some jambalaya and some shrimp right now. Now I do have to ask this question because I saw this the last time we did it. This is actually a buddy of mine, Brent. He asked the question: if you could eat only one of these three types of meat for the rest of your life, you could only eat one of these. Would it be pork, beef, or chicken, and why? See, that's a good question.
Well, I would usually jump on pork, right? Because I love all three. Right. I mean, because it depends on how they're prepared. Mm-hmm. But I've been just digging on brisket lately. Like, man, the barbecue places up here are, my God, we've got good barbecue places in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And the places that can do brisket right, oh my God, it's like meat candy.
Right.
You're just oh. So I guess I would go beef these days, even though I love bacon, I love pork. I'm really digging. It was just the most amazing beef tenderloin the other night. Just real, again, simple preparation with a rub and some kosher salt. You put it on a cast iron pan to sear it, and then you cook it on the grill for like 5 minutes, and you're just done. Just simple food,
Yep. No.
But it's the fresh.
But I'm starving.
We never freeze any of our meat.
Right.
Yeah, right. Well, you wanted to go food, right?
Yeah, I know.
Look at me. It's my favorite topic.
That's right. I agree. I totally agree.
Screw games. Games are a distant second, especially in this lockdown. It's cooking and eating all the time.
I mean, that's all you can do, right? So I think my answer was beef as well because of burger, steak. And if you get the hankering, you're like, man, I miss ribs though from pork. You can still do beef ribs, and you can flavor them like, so you still get a little bit of that texture. But I'm with you, man. I love brisket. There's nothing better than a great brisket. So yeah, that's good. Those are good answers. Really, really good answers there. So fun stuff. So I'm gonna ask you one more game question before we hit the road here. I want to go through the chat, make sure I didn't miss anybody before I ask the last question here. So. Your name is on a lot of them. You've designed a lot of them. And I want to talk about it real quick before we go. What is your opinion now, as you're on that side of them, of the classic put down tiles and deliver cubes and all that sort of stuff? Train games. Do you still like that genre, or do you like that genre in the first place? You know what I'm saying? I love.
It's funny because, well, you're going to touch on. Sometimes I don't like my own games. Right? You finish a game design, right. You're like, I never want to see this again in my life.
I don't like some of the tricks I do, but I do them for the audience. You know what I'm
saying? Right. But when it comes to Railroad Tycoon, or it's called whatever now, Rails of the World, Railways of the World.
Mm-hmm. That's the version I have over there.
When it comes to that game, I'll still play it. Yeah, anytime. It's just so much fun. The concept was that Martin Wallace had. I'm sorry, I'm losing my hand. There we go. Martin Wallace had. There you go. Martin Wallace. Back in I don't know 02, one of those cube pick up and deliver games.
Was it Steam
it was really. It was called Steam.
Yeah.
Now they've redesigned it, relaunched a game called Steam.
Right.
But the original design was very, very popular, not only train gamers, but heavy Euro gamers. It had a really steep learning curve. But the people that got into it just absolutely loved it.
Right.
And it was one of those where you drop the tiles and make the tracks and deliver the cubes. And I had gotten the license for Railroad Tycoon from, Sid Meier and those guys. And basically I was like, well, what if we took that mechanic, that type of game, and made it a little more approachable to the broader gamer community, and loaded it up with toys, right? We had, all the cool track pieces and all the cool little like towers and water so cool. Towers and all that stuff. Yeah, it's just fun. I mean, part of the beauty of this art form is it's great art, and it, literally paintings or drawings or whatever that decorate the game, but also the toys. I mean, it's we're still playing with toys, Absolutely. Right? If you can do that,
it's toys with rules.
So it's kind of that. It's that interesting, and that's why mini games are so popular. People see the toys and they're like, "Wow, I want to play with those toys." And unfortunately, that's evolved into, well, we can sell a game just by selling the toys, and the game doesn't matter.
It's true.
And which is unfortunate. But we wanted to create that perfect kind of nexus of really great mechanical design with a really fun railroad theme with toys and a big giant map and building your own railroad empire. And it was just a really good combination of ingredients. So yeah, I'll play that game anytime. Like, it's just still so much fun.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things I wanted to ask. There's two last questions, and then we'll let you call it a night here. But one is, are you able to divorce yourself from the idea that, hey, this is my game, I made this, and still enjoy it as a game, or is it still kind of like, man, I wish I would have done this, or I wish I'd have tweaked this, before, or can you enjoy your games?
Yeah, I think if I'm playing one of my bad games, it's a nightmare. Right?
I can't believe I did this.
Right. It's bad. It's not. I don't want to do it. But if I'm playing Railroad Tycoon or Age of Empires 3 or Raccoon, I love those games. I'm still up to play them. But yeah, if someone had to wrestle me down and said play Sid Meier's Civilization from Eagle Games, I'd be like, what's wrong with you? There's like thousands of other games. Why do we have to do this?
That's funny.
Yeah,
that's funny. Now, and the last thing, do you still play solo games? Do you still play solo games? And if you do, what's one you've enjoyed either recently or that you really enjoy?
Yeah, I don't. Other than on the PC, PC has become my solo strategy game, solo wargaming tool, or the phone. Like if I've got a good game on mobile. So I'll play Terraforming Mars, or I'll play Civilization, or I'll play Twilight Struggle.
Yeah.
And so I guess I do play solo when I can play against an AI.
Mm-hmm.
Would I play a paper and cardboard game on the table by myself? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
That would be unusual.
I think it's partially because you have to think and not to say there aren't great AI systems out there, but you're still having to take that moment to get out of your strategy and think for some, or draw a card or whatever like that. So it's interesting. I'm kind of on the same page. I used to, when I first got in the hobby, when I was immersing myself with everything with it, I was like, I've got to do everything. I've got to play this solo. Now it's like, hey, are you busy? You want to play this instead?
Right. It's because the other part of the great, fun of games and the art is the social end, right? And so, it's not quite as good an experience to just do it by yourself, because there's the competition, right? We're all competitors, right? I want to go and just kick somebody's butt and win, right? That's another piece of the I guess the cracked puzzle of why games are popular. Is you get to compete.
And then part of the strategy of competing is not just playing your game. It's looking across to him and be like, wait, they need that piece. I can stop them from getting that piece. A 20-point swing is still a 20-point swing, even if it's 10 for you and 10 minus them.
Absolutely.
So there's that.
Yeah.
So Glenn, thank you for coming on tonight, man. Good stuff. Just there's so much meat on the bone just to dive in with the designers, especially with you and your kind of like long history of gaming, man. We could do this for hours and hours, but I'm going to give you any final word you want to say as far as gaming, anything like that, anything you want to touch on. If not, I'm going to hit the intro and we're going to get out of here. But other than that, man, thank you. Let me just say thank you so much. Oh, yeah, I know people know Forbidden Games, but tell them the best way for you guys and get all kind of the updates on what's coming and everything like that. You didn't ask me to do that, but I want to, just because I like putting you guys over anyway, because I enjoy the game so much.
No, thanks. Yeah, I mean, the new news is we've got our expansions, which are now done at the factory and being loaded on the boat for Railroad Rivals.
I was totally jealous, by the way. I didn't mention that earlier. I was totally jealous that Carla was in it, not me. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
And I was just doing the quality check on it last night, and it came out great. Like the
Yeah.
wood components of the wood version of the game is just like they killed it. The factory really killed it this time.
Great.
And Raccoon Tycoon expansion, the Fat Cat expansion it looks amazing. It's in this giant box.
That's awesome.
Lots of goodies, and it's just it's a really nice upgrade to the game. So those are being loaded on the boat. Then we'll have a Kickstarter for Lizard Wizard, which I just got all the artwork from Annie Stagg, who did all the artwork for Raccoon. And oh my God, we're going to be kind of.
How long does that take? I'm so, like, because that's detailed work right there.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah. She submitted. She just submitted the 7 lizards, dragon wizards, and 7 familiars.
Right.
So 14 original oil paintings. That took her probably 4 or 5 months of pretty steady work to knock out. But this isn't like you can just get on a computer and they can knock out a piece of art pretty quickly. No. These are like painted in layers and layers because she's just using. It's like old Dutch masters the way her stuff looks. Right. It's crazy details and depth and light and anyway. So she just submitted 14 oil paintings to me in the last couple days.
That's awesome. And
I was just drooling over these things. So we're going to kind of tease those out over the next 2 months to prepare. We have got a late July Kickstarter.
Great.
So we'll release 1 or 2 a week, and people can kind of enjoy those. But and the game's come along, thank God.
Yeah. It's finally moving.
Yeah, well, it's actually, like I said, we had 4 prototypes that I wasn't too happy with, but we finally circled back around and got the game design kind of in that sweet spot where it's really, really good right now. So I'm excited about that game too.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's exciting.
Yeah. And then for next year, I'm kind of working on a secret project that is basically a combination of Age of Empires 3 and some of the mechanics or a feel of terraforming Mars with a civilization theme.
That sounds amazing.
So,
that's right up my alley, sir.
That's the one, and it's going to be heavy. I'm so psyched about this game.
Yeah.
And I've been working on it already for about a year, and it's got the engine building and kind of interesting interplay between the board and the engine in your little you'll have a little home city board that you're building on.
That sounds amazing. That's exactly what I love.
Right? It's pretty freaking awesome. And so yeah, I've been kind of fiddling with all the because it's going to be so many, call it, moving parts and components that I've been working on it for about a year to just get everything kind of designed and kind of pulled together and have all the systems working together in the right balance in the right way. Because in games like that, balance is really the trick, right? Absolutely. And that was what I think, I don't want to say killed Tapestry, but it affected people's feeling about Tapestry, which was another great Civilization game.
I enjoy Tapestry, yeah. But you're right.
But the balance, right, is it's so hard to balance a very complex system. And I don't want that to happen with this game. I want the game, like Age of Empires has a pretty good balance, and I want this to have that kind of feel to it. But it'll have, it'll have that worker placement, and it'll have that track system from Age of Empires 3, and it's going to have, it's going to be a really good game. So I'm psyched about that one.
Well, there's the tease right there, everyone. That's what now we're all excited, like foaming at the mouth. We're ready, man. So that's great. Well, good stuff, man. Glenn, thank you for stopping by. Just wanted to say, it's been a blast hanging out talking to you. Hope you all are enjoying the daily chats here on the Dice Tower. Check out Forbidden Games. See all the stuff coming, and especially that tease that's coming. We'll eventually get some info about that. You know what I'm saying? Some official info. That was official. Couldn't get more official, but you know what I mean. Check out the expansions that are coming there, and then make sure to check out the Dice Tower. Everything coming. We're going to do daily chats every night. Great guests, all that sort of stuff. Thank you guys for hanging out, watching, and we will see you soon.